Thanks for joining in. This is going to be a study of an encouragement. I wanted to talk about Hanukkah, share some thoughts I've had, and what I wanted to present is a position so that you know, with Hanukkah coming up in the next few days, whether you feel led to keep it or you don't. At least you would get a position to hear some thoughts that I may have as your brother. The first place I would like to take us to is First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 11. And I wanted to read a couple verses here just to get an idea of the scenario that we were finding in the book of Maccabees. For those that don't know, the book of Maccabees is in the Apocrypha. And as you see, I'm using the Septuagint here, but you can also use the King James Authorized Version, and you can get everything that I'm finding here. All the information that I'm going to share is readily available for you. You can go and look online and so forth. Here it says in the book of Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 11, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. Very interesting. We see some connection to the mentality that you have from those that came out of Egypt and were desiring to go back into Egypt where they had better food. And in this case, we have something really similar. And here it says that they had much sorrow. So when we continue to read, it says, so this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. Whereupon they built a place of exercise as Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. Now, when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have the dominion of two realms. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen and a great navy. He made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt, but Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. So, some areas to point out here is that we see that the Israelites wanted to go and make a covenant with the heathen. As you know, throughout the text, we would find even today that Yahuwah, the Most High, has called us to be separate from the heathen or from the Gentiles or the other nations that are around us. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't live in these nations, wherever you are in the world, or that your neighbors aren't Gentiles and heathen. Doesn't mean you should treat them poorly. It's just that what some of the practices that the heathens do are going to be foul. And in this case, we're seeing that the Israelites at the time wanted to go and make a covenant, it says here in verse 11. Now, some of the areas that they were speaking on to do, which I found interesting, was even to make themselves uncircumcised. Now, uncircumcision is something in that is medically possible. And so I thought that would be something that you all could look up if you like to understand that, because this is something that could be done medically. They also said they would forsake the holy covenant, which is a covenant with the Most High, and join themselves to the heathen. Another factor here is in First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 48, just a few some verses down. It says that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation. And then it says in verse 49, to the end they might forget the law or the Torah, change all the ordinances. So what we're finding is that they would even go to the extent to not continue to do what the Most High has said to do, is to circumcise your children, your male sons. And it says that they would stop doing that, and they would make their souls abominable in all manner of uncleanness. So much so that in verse 49 that they might forget the Torah. and change all the ordinances. And this word, the law or the Torah or his instructions, is a manner of life. It's a way of life that we've been given, all men that cling on to the covenant, for a way of living. So what we find here, I wanted to bring us here into the first chapter to see that there was a rebellion. There was a people that turned themselves from the Most High. They turned from the Most High and wanted to cling on to the nations and create a covenant with them, and also turn away from the covenant with the Most High that they've had. So, this war that had to happen now that we're going to speak about today is what you would look at as almost like a civil war. Because not only do you have the Greeks on that side of the war, you also have Israelites with them fighting against other Israelites. Now that war happened, and we come into the next portion where we're going to see in First Maccabees chapter 4 the end result. So starting in First Maccabees chapter 4 verse 52, we're going to find that what it says is that now on the 5 and 20th day, which is the 25th day of the ninth month, which is called the month Kislev or Kaslu, in the 140th and 8th year, and they rose up betimes in the morning and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made. Look at what time and what day the heathen hath profaned it. Even in that was it dedicated with songs and citherns and harps and cymbals. Then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising the Elohim of heaven, who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, and offered burnt offerings with gladness, and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. They decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold and with shields, and the gates and the chambers they renewed, and hanging doors upon them. Thus was there very great gladness among the people, for that the reproach of the heathen was put away. Moreover, Judas and his brethren, with the whole congregation of Israel, ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days, from the 5 and 20th day of the month of Kislev or Kaslu, with myrrh and gladness. And at that time also they builded up the Mount Sion with high walls and strong towers round about, lest the Gentiles should come and tread it down as they had done before. And they set there a garrison to keep it, and fortified Bethsura to preserve it, that the people might have a defense against Edomia. So what we find in this chapter, to point out, is this is after the war has happened. They take back, if you haven't read the book of Maccabees, I would encourage you do, but they took back the temple that was taken from them. They did an abomination on the altar. They used the animal that shouldn't have been used. Yahuwah gives us certain animals that was to be used on the altar, and they didn't. And Judas and his brothers came and they took it back. There's a big war happening. And that war is what we're talking about for this celebration of Hanukkah. It's a war that has happened, and ever since that war, from that point in time, they were encouraged. And one of the questions that I would say to ask within yourself to pray about is, were Judas and his brethren, and the whole congregation of Israel, were they led by the Holy Spirit or the Ruach HaKodesh to proclaim this day? Now, it's a victory, so it would be something that becomes what we look at as a national holiday. For those that are of Israel, now we're not talking about the country of Israel, but I'm saying as an Israelite, if Yahuwah is your Elohim, if he is the one that you are connected to with covenant, then this makes you a part of Israel. So could it be looked at as a religious holiday? Could it be looked at more of a national holiday? It leans to me more like a national holiday for his people to proclaim something. And a lot of times in the scriptures, we see the word remember. We see Yahuwah telling us, don't forget to remember when let's just say, for instance, you talk about the rainbow in the sky. You remember the time of Noah. If you talk about the time when the water was spread, and you see these Israelites coming from Egypt to cross across the Red Sea, that was a time to still remember. We have our feast days, for instance, Passover is a time to remember. Those are just a few times, and there's many more that you can go and analyze by doing word searches, and you can see that Yahuwah has called us to remember. So with that being said, we're looking at a time of Hanukkah, which is coming up, that it's a time to remember what Yahuwah did. And it gives you this understanding here in verse 58. Then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising the Elohim of heaven who had given them good success. So we see in verse 55 that the Elohim of heaven, the Most High, gave them good success. They acknowledged that it was Yahuwah. They knew that it wasn't themselves to do this type of war. Now, again, if you go read the book of Maccabees, you'll see the two different armies that are fighting. Now, when you do read the book of First Maccabees, you're gonna want to read Second Maccabees, and you're gonna see how they expound on what happens. And so, just to take you into the portion that connects to what we just said, here in Second Maccabees chapter 10, verse 6, it says, "And they kept the 8 days with gladness, as in the Feast of the Tabernacles." So, if you know, in Leviticus 23, we read about the Feast of Tabernacles and what they do, and what if you do keep the covenant and you do keep his feast days, this is what you do as well. If you don't, and you just read the Bible and you understand this is what they did. So this is something that it says they did it as in. So during this time of Maccabees, they were saying that they're going to keep the 8 days as in the Feast of Tabernacles, remembering that not long afore they had held the Feast of Tabernacles when as they wandered in the mountains and dens like beasts. Therefore they bare branches and fair bows and palms also, and sang psalms unto him that had given them good success in cleansing his place. They didn't claim it to be their place, their house. They claimed it to be his place, which is the Most High's dwelling, right? And they ordained also by a common statute and decree that every year those days should be kept of the whole nation of the Jews, or in the Hebrew, it would be the Yahudim. And this was the end of Antiochus, called Epiphanes. So, a great portion to read just to connect it. But again, I would encourage to go and read for yourself, First Maccabees and Second Maccabees, and you would have a closer look at what had happened and how it all went down. Now, this is the victory that's getting remembered during Hanukkah. It's a celebration, right? It's a celebration that you would sing songs, you would eat together, you would pray together, right? This is one of those kind of times of the year. It's a joyous time because of what had happened and the success they had received only by the Most High. The next thing I want to take us to is a word search to show us the word Hanukkah in the Hebrew. You can look at in the King James Version the word dedication, and you find that there's two words that's used as the word Hanukkah in the Hebrew. The word Hanukkah here, it says, according to the Strong's Concordance, is consecration, and they use the word dedication in the English. And looking at how many verses that they use that particular word in, you see there's 4 verses here in the book of Ezra, and you see it in the book of Daniel. Now, these times weren't the same thing as what we're finding in the book of Maccabees. So, because the word Hanukkah is used in the Hebrew, and you see it in the Old Testament, doesn't mean that they were doing what we're finding today happening in the ninth month. It's very specific to the victory that was done by the Most High during the time of Maccabees. But if you wanted to see it, you could see that this word here is used here. They kept the dedication of his this house of Elohim with joy, and there was a time when they consecrated the place, the house of Yahuwah. And so you see that there are 4 verses again to show you that dedication is being used in the English, but in behind that word in the Hebrew, you would see Hanukkah, and it would be a time when they were doing some type of consecration. But it's not the same time that they, when you look at it from this perspective, it's not going to be dealing with what we find in Maccabees in the ninth month. So the celebrations are different. There's another word here. It again, we're looking at it from the Strong's Concordance. It says dedication, consecration, and you find this one here used multiple times. We have 7 verses. Again, you're using this word Hanukkah in the Old Testament, and you're going to see that it's used throughout the Old Testament. But as I just stated, it's not the same thing that was happening in the ninth month of the year. And if you go back into the word search, you find that there is a Greek word here, the Feast of Dedication here. And you see it here. I'm going to go to that word as well. And this is the time where you see in the New Testament that it says that in John chapter 10, verse 22, and it was at Jerusalem the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter. And Yahushua walked in the temple in Solomon's porch, and then you can read on. So you see that he is in a time, there is a time period showing that in Yahushua's day that there was a feast of dedication happening. And they're acknowledging it, which is interesting in the New Testament for a purpose and a reason. And it says, and it was winter. So it tells us what time of the year it was as well. I wanted to point that out just to show that it is a specific time, and we have it in the New Testament as well. Overall, I wanted to talk about it so we can see that there is a word Hanukkah in the Hebrew in the 66 or the regular canon, and you do see it, but it doesn't mean that that's the time that they were talking about in the book of Maccabees, that just because they were doing any consecration. I also want to bring us here so we can see that in the New Testament, it's spoken about to solidify that there was a time period that this was acknowledged, and the time period it was in the winter. Now I want to go into some of the areas that how and people keep this Hanukkah. And you see here, we're going into the Britannica. I just looked up Hanukkah, so this is something that you can do yourself. You can go and research it. I think Britannica is a good resource. It's one that we can all see. It gives you a breakdown of Hanukkah. It tells you the origin and history. So it's going to give you what we're talking about. Now, one thing it comes in because what we find is that there's something that's put out there, for those that have researched Hanukkah, or if you haven't. Just here on the right side of the screen, you see that there's a 9 candlestick menorah. And this is what people light during Hanukkah. As we looked in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, that's not told to do. Where do people get that from? I wanted to go there. Here you see that in the Britannica, it says this is where it's written at. It's in the Talmud in Shabbat 21b. And it talks about the miracle of the oil in the temple. And it says that according to the Talmud, when Judas Maccabeus entered the temple, he found only a small jar of oil that had not been defiled by Antiochus. The jar contained only enough oil to burn for 1 day, but miraculously the oil burned for 8 days until new consecrated oil could be found, establishing the precedent that the festival should last 8 days. So this is what we're finding here. And if we continue to read, it says the early date for this story, or at least the practice of lighting 8 candles, is confirmed by the debate of the 1st century CE scholars Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and his school taught that 1 candle should be lit on the first night of Hanukkah and 1 more each night of the festival. Shammai held that all 8 candles should be lit in the first night, with the number decreasing by 1 each night thereafter. So the lighting of candles during Hanukkah is here, as we just read in Britannica. It's going to be a tradition. It's a tradition that these 2 men debated over, and we have 2 different sides. One side says to light 1 candle a day. The other side says light them all in 1 day and then take them out per day. So I want us to go to Shabbat 21b in the Talmud to read as well what they have written there, so that you can see. Now, I'm not encouraging anybody to go and read the Talmud, but I want us to get this resource and where they're getting their information from. And here in Shabbat 21b, as we found in Britannica, it took us here to show us that it says, the Gemara asks, what is Hanukkah and why are lights kindled on Hanukkah? The Gemara answers, the sages taught on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. One may not eulogize on them, and one may not fast on them. What is the reason, is the question. When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil there to light the candelabrum for only one day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the candelabrum from it 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted, here it says, the sages instituted those days, made them holidays with recitation of Hallel and the special thanksgiving in prayer and blessings. So here we see in Shabbat 21b, it talks about exactly what we're talking about. And you're going to find that this is what has been brought to a tradition by it says here, the sages instituted those days. Now, looking back at Britannica, we find that this here was a debate, though, just as we just read it and mentioned it, it's a debate on how to light the candles. But what I do want to highlight is that we don't find in Maccabees. It's something that if a person would like to do it, they should know that it is a tradition. It's not something that was written in the book of Maccabees. Staying in Britannica, we're going to find out some more information for us to look at and be aware of. It says under the modern popularity, they also talk about how it's during a time when you find Christmas happening. Here it says the opportunity to celebrate a holiday about the same time as Christmas allowed American Jews to maintain their unique identity while also participating in winter festivals. The novel of importance of Hanukkah soon spread from Reform Judaism to other branches of the tradition as Christmas increasingly became commercialized in the early 20th century. Jews began to add to Hanukkah various Christmas-like traditions in parallel, such as gift giving, new joyful songs, and festive Hanukkah-themed decorations. So here we see that in Britannica, they're even giving us information to show us that there becomes a blend almost. It's almost like a mesh happening, but you're giving gifts on this particular day. They're singing new, it says, joyful songs. It doesn't sing that they don't say that they're singing psalms. It says that they were singing new joyful songs. Now I'm pointing that out because I think it's interesting that they take on traditions. Now, what we found in Maccabees is the whole war was, again, when we looked at chapter 1, we seen an Israelite people connecting and making covenant with the heathens and taking on their traditions. And by doing that, they clung on to a new covenant that wasn't one with the Most High. Now, Yahuwah does have a new covenant in the New Testament. He does proclaim a new covenant, and we see that also in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31. But in this case, they're clinging on to the heathen. That's what the whole understanding was in the first chapter of Maccabees. So here it says that Christmas and Hanukkah were so close that they became parallel. They also talk about saying prayers and singing songs. You see that in some accounts, you would see that they would read from a certain psalm. They would read Psalms 113 to 118. So that would be another tradition. Again, you can go and do that. I don't think that there's anything bad about that, about reading the scriptures. It's just a tradition that they did bring on amongst the Israelites. And lastly, I'll take us here to where we see that they make food. It says that they make potato pancakes, donuts. They fry other things in fried oil, which recall the miracle of oil so they fry food in it, right? Children receive presents and gifts of money. They also often do. They also do this rolling of a top. So the reason why I'm bringing this out is not to discourage anybody, but just to let you know that these are traditions. They're traditions that if you feel led and you want to make a potato pancake, go right ahead. If you want to make some donuts, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with those things, right? But what I want everybody to be aware of is that the difference between what the scripture says and what has been brought upon by tradition. If you would like to keep Hanukkah or to celebrate Hanukkah, so as a recap, what we did is we went through Maccabees chapter 1, we went through Maccabees chapter 4, and then we also went through second Maccabees to show that it's also in there as well because first and Maccabees they're really related in a lot of ways. They're in one book it's going to expound more of the other book, but we went to those areas to see what it actually says in the text instead of just saying this is what we should do. Now, in the book of Maccabees, it gives you encouragement to sing songs, to come together and eat. And they even compare it to Feast of Tabernacles. Of course, you can pray as well. Now, everything else, as we went through the scriptures and we went through what it says in Britannica, we got to see that there were some other areas that were brought upon the Israelites or the Jewish people over time, and we even seen that there was a debate between two rabbis on how to light this nine candlestick menorah. Now, we did go back also into the Old Testament of the 66, the canon, and we got to see that there is a word Hanukkah that is there. So that way somebody would know that the word Hanukkah just means consecration or dedication in the English. And but every time they were doing any Hanukkah or consecration in the Old Testament, it was not because of the ninth month of the month of Kislev, where we see here they're doing a celebration for what happened during that time in the book of Maccabees. And lastly, we did get to see that Yahusha was also in Jerusalem during the time period when it was winter, it says, and the festival of dedication. Nothing here that I'm presenting is something hidden that you can't go and find on your own. You can go and look at the Britannica. You can probably read other articles. But look at the book of Maccabees. I would encourage again to go read through the book of Maccabees, first Maccabees, second Maccabees, see the atrocities that happened in those books, analyze what had happened, compare it to how do you want to keep Hanukkah, the celebration that you are doing for this great thing that had happened. And enjoy the time with your family. Enjoy the time this year if you choose to. It's in a few days coming up next week, depending on what calendar you keep, of course. And so, other than that, I hope this blesses you. I hope that you be encouraged. Yahuwah bless you in all your homes. And look out. I think we're going to have to do one for Purim as well. So I'll be putting some information together again. And nothing is new under the sun. So all the information is out here for all of us to go and research and find ourselves. But I just wanted to compile as much in a simple form for everybody so that we can all see it together and analyze it. But if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments if you would like. I appreciate that. And if you haven't liked or subscribed the video, please do share it with your friends, share it with your family, and encourage them also if they feel led to go and keep Hanukkah and to have a day of food and prayer and singing and most importantly, fellowship. So much shalom, and I'll see you on the next one. Hallelujah. Shalom.